Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this special 10 years of community celebration. My name is Jasmine White, and I am the community manager here at HashiCorp. We want to thank you all for joining. We could not have this celebration without you. So to start, we actually have a few special guests. And many of you may be wondering, what is a HashiCorp User Group? Well, you are in luck because today we have some special guests joining from across the world from our HashiCorp user groups. So first we're going to bring on our Luxembourg HashiCorp user group. Hi, Stefan, just wave hi. And we also have the Amsterdam HashiCorp user group. Hi, everyone. Hi, Chris. Hi, Bram. It's so great to see that we have not only our community joining us virtually, but we have some of our community that's joining in person. So you all need to join HashiCorp user groups. Hi, can you hear me? HashiCorp user group. Hi, everyone. Oh. You all need to join some HashiCorp user groups so that you can get on in the action in person too. I'm so glad that we have two of our user groups that are meeting in person to celebrate 10 years of community with us and that they were able to join. So I know that you all aren't here to hear me talk, so I'm going to decrease, but I want to introduce our two MCs for today. They are champions when it comes to HashiCorp tools. They are ambassadors for HashiCorp. So I want to bring on Roberth and Marco. Hi, Roberth. Hi, Marco.
Hey, Jasmine.
Hey,
tell us where you guys are from.
Oh, hard question. No, I'm based out of Norway, and I actually also part of the Oslo HashiCorp user group, which has been a little bit dormant. We'll get it back again, especially now after COVID after pandemic and everything like that. But hopefully next year will be the year that we will have a lot of physical meetups for there as well.
Nice.
How about you, Marco?
Marco, where are you calling in
Cheers,
from?
Robert and Jasmine. Yeah, I'm actually based in the UK, in Edinburgh. But I usually join the London group because that's probably the most active one in the UK. So hi for everyone from my end from UK.
Whoa, well, I'm calling in from New York. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn this over to you, Roberta, and you, Marco, and take it away. Please introduce our special guest.
All right. Marco, do you want to go or should I go?
Well, either way, I have to say I'm super excited about the session today, Robert. I think we have quite a lineup. So let's introduce the guest without the further ado, shall we? So I think today we are proud to announce that we are joined by the two co-founders, Mitchell and Armon, and we'll also be having the director of community, Melissa Gurney-Green, and there will be a senior in the field, like it doesn't need more introduction. It's a principal developer advocate, Nick Jackson, joining us as well.
Yeah, it's a great lineup, and I see that we've got the full pod. We've got everyone with us today, so this is great. Oh, here they come. Hello.
Oh, I am really sorry, Dave. I didn't know you're joining us as well. The brief was actually saying only Nick.
I saw that, and I saw Dave was joining the studio, so that's great. Like I said, we got a full house today. Really awesome. Let's see. We have several questions here, and I don't know about how it works with the comments live, but people feel free to ask stuff, and we'll see whatever we get to. But let's just kick it off to whomever wants to answer. First question is, how is HashiCorp the same and different today than you envisioned 10 years ago? I don't know who want to jump in and.
Sure, I can kick us off. And first of all, thanks both of you, Robert and Marco, for joining and moderating, and thanks everybody in the community for dialing in. Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about over the last 10 years, sort of like what's changed, what stayed the same. I think one of the things that's interesting to us is the reason people joined the company in many ways, has been a passion for infrastructure and solving the kind of core challenges of cloud infrastructure. And that hasn't really changed, right? I think I still meet new hires. In fact, I literally right before this had a new hire session. And so I was talking to a bunch of the new folks who just joined the company. And I think that passion is still very much what motivates the company, right? It's people who are, care about infrastructure, care about operations, care about security and how we solve these challenges. And I think that's what brought me and Mitchell together, 10 years ago. And it's, I think, what's still bringing, people to the company. And I think in many ways, the principles and the culture of the company has stayed the same, right? I think that ethos of focusing on pragmatism, on kindness, on humility, on really like the craftsmanship of how we deliver to customers, and that the beautiful works better. I think that very much is the same type of people that are joining the company today, and I think you kind of see that in sort of how the company's grown up.
I want to kind of just interject as well, because before I worked for HashiCorp, I was a user of the tools. I was using Vagrant back in probably 2013-ish, and then Consul when we first did microservice deployment, and then that kind of expanded into Terraform, and then I joined the company, and it's been nearly 6 years for me, and this still feels like the same organization creating the same great product that I fell in love with nearly 10 years ago, and the same great people that I wanted to work with when I joined nearly 6 years ago. It's pretty incredible that's stayed the same, and I think it's down to the principles and the culture and the people kind of upholding those.
Yeah, I think this is a community event. I was going to say, like, what's stayed the same is sort of like the excitement around the community. We've grown our community in a lot of other ways with actual customers and bringing in new groups like large enterprises. But I mean, if I just look at the community that existed 10 years ago, that community still exists today, which is really exciting. I think something that's changed about that is, we've grown enough that we have to do them via live streams like this. I think like 10 years ago, Armand and I probably would have tried to fly to as many of these as we could. It's not very practical anymore and unfortunate, but I think it's still really cool to be able to participate in some way with the community. Yeah.
Excellent. Anyone else have anything to say about that? I think like it sounds really great. I love the fact that it's like there's not a big change from like the I guess you can call it startup spirit and like the culture internally. That's a great thing. Dave, you're.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I can only comment on the last 7 years, not last 10, maybe six and a half. I think it's that consistency of like, and we're trying to solve very specific problems in the world of infrastructure, and the scope's grown a little bit, but fundamentally, like the core way we do it, in engaging with the open source community to help determine what the things are, hasn't really changed. I actually sometimes think it's more like a frog in a hot water container, where like we don't remember to look around and realize there are thousands of people around us. I think that's kind of what it feels like. I think maybe it's what it always feels like. Maybe it's part of being remote as well, is you don't get to see it until you go to a user group and you see the scale of it, or you read the download logs and you realize people have downloaded the Amazon provider 1 billion times in its life. I think these aren't things you really think about, because I don't think we're not sitting around observing it. We're sort of in it. I think to Nick's point, it feels to me exactly like it did 7 years ago. It just, the reach is slightly bigger, but maybe that's the goal, is to make it continue to feel the same way.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't know, Marco, if you want to take the next question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really love this kind of a discussion around company values and everything that you all build together, and you put all that back to the community. I think that's really admirable. And I still have fond memories. Like, I spoke to Mitchell like 2017 in one of the config management camps, and what I really appreciated is him being so kind of approachable, and as well as down to earth, and kind of collaborating with the community, kind of going to all those events. And I think you're still embodying that values as well. So I think at this point my question would be really, do you feel like you had to change any of the initial values that you kind of set up when you're kind of starting the company, or do you feel like that's kind of the thing that you got it right from the start? Maybe Mitchell, Armin, to take us away with that.
I mean, I think when we think about the values, we have both the Tao and the principles. The Tao is the engineering principles and engineering, I guess, things, and then the principles are more of how we like run the company and the people involved in it. But I think when I look at them, they're fairly like generic to a certain extent. They're very directional, because in a lot of them, you could pick different directions, and it would just be a totally valid and different culture. Some you couldn't. I don't think you could build a company that's like not kind, for example. But you could certainly pick some and just go a different direction. It would be totally valid. But I think one of the important things about them is they are generic enough that I think they will last a very long time, and we haven't had to change them too much. The Tao hasn't changed at all. The principles, I think we've modified a few sentences just to clarify things, but the core meaning hasn't changed. But yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is, in some ways, now that they're they're probably more like 9 years old, I guess. I think we did them like a year or two in. But now that they're almost 10 years old, I mean, I think the most important thing is it's shown that we got them mostly right, in the sense they haven't had to change. And I think at this point that bodes well for the future, and that they likely won't have to see significant changes.
Yeah, I echo kind of Mitchell's point, which is it feels like they're mostly locked in. I'd say the only thing I'd maybe do differently is I think the language, I think the vernacular for some of this stuff was different back then, right? Like I think I look at the Tao, for example, and we talk about like communicating sequential processes, which is like, it's a very academic way for us to say microservices. But at the time when we wrote the Tao, like microservices wasn't an expression that people were using. So there was like not an easy way for us to express, that methodology of like, hey, you should have these independent services or actors, and they should communicate over well-defined API or whatever. So there was sort of academic terms for it, but like industry didn't call it microservices. So I think there's some of that where we could probably modernize it and sort of like, describe some of those things in a different way. But I don't think the fundamental principle isn't different. It'd just be sort of a wording change, or sort of how we talk about it would be a little bit different.
Cool. So, sounds good. How about maybe, I see Nick, you're unmuted, like maybe from the, as part of being an employee kind of perspective, how do you find those?
I mean, I think the principles are fabulous, and I really do kind of admire any company that talks openly about those, because, I mean, like, it gives you something to think about every time you do anything you do. I mean, empathy, just kind of bringing something up. it's really important because you're building system tools which are people are going to be using. You've got to think about the stress and the circumstance that people are going to be under when they're using those tools. So having that kind of really front of mind as kind of part of everything you do, I think is a really good thing. And like, you know, it's not just kind of like something that we say, it's something that that people do and believe in and really uphold. I mean, you could have some terrific arguments with people if there was ever like, hey, we're going to get rid of this principle or that principle, because, you know, people do believe in them. They do kind of uphold them. And I think I'd like to think it kind of, it does reflect in the outward output of the organization as well, which I like is still pretty great stuff, right? Like, I'm allowed to say that, aren't I? Just because I'm wearing a shirt, I can still say it's great stuff.
Well, I think you have to mean it, and for it to really make an authentic difference in the community too. We can talk about our principles all day, but the fact is that we live them as we're engaging with the community and as we're talking to the community. And I think they see that and appreciate it, and it makes everything we do with them much more authentic, because we can have honest conversations about what we're doing and what we want to do, and engage with kindness and understanding of where they're coming from too.
Yeah, I can definitely confirm that from the community perspective. So keep up the good work, of course.
I'll just Mark.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
I think I kind of step back. Obviously, I didn't create the principles, so I'm an observer of them as much as anything. And I think get a repeatable thing, maybe as people talk about company building, is for every new hire onboarding, we actually talk about it explicitly. We say, you know, we use this phrase, and we use it often, is a company is nothing more than a group of people aligned around a common idea, which is the essence of, you know, what we all get up together and do. But actually, we're aligned around two ideas. One is around the mission of the company, which is around this notion of automation and infrastructure. And the second one is a set of principles that reflect how we are going to act in the retirement of that mission. And I think that's actually a super neat framework that we use, which is very, very clear. It's very, very overt. You know, we want to work in an environment where people, you know, react a certain way, have a particular way of thinking about problem solving. And it's not just about the mission, it's actually about how we do it. I think that repeatability is there for really any company. I think we've been fortunate to follow that for the last 7 or 8 years.
Cool. Thank you. Over to you, Robert.
Yeah, I like I like the idea that you're keeping kind of these values going. I think you're right. Like, you can't really like build a company without having like a set of values that make sense for like, if you're doing something for someone, you need to have empathy, for instance. That kind of makes sense, right? And like I said, Mitchell, you can't build a company that, you know, that's not kind. You probably could, but you probably wouldn't scale very well. So speaking of scaling, so like scaling a company from 2 to now 2,000 employees, like, have there been any like significant challenges doing that, or?
Many, I would say. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any organization that could, 1,000x's the staff without some challenges along the way. Ultimately, I put it in like, there's probably 3 categories, right? There's sort of people, process, systems. And I think all of them, are terrible along the way, right? Because I think at every phase, basically, you design the company around for a specific size, right? When you're 10 people, or when we were 2 people, our planning process was, we swivel our chair. I'm like, Mitchell, what do you want to work on today? That was our planning process. That doesn't really work at our scale. So I think at every one of those points, whether it was 10 people, then 30 people, then 50 people, then 80 people, then, so on and so forth, your process breaks because you're solving it for a different scale of like, how do we plan things? How do we communicate things? How do we sort of work together as a team? So I think your process keeps changing because your size is bigger. And then I think the systems you need to support that are different, right? Like at 2 people, you don't need anything. And then at some point you need Slack. And then at some point you need Zoom. And then at some point you need Jira. And then at some point you need, so on and so forth. And so I think there's a constant, as you add more people, your process breaks, and then you need different systems to support the new process. So you're constantly reinventing that as you go. And then I think on the people side, the hard part is you're constantly interviewing, you're constantly onboarding people. Obviously there's some level of churn, right, as people leave the organization or whatnot. So you have to retrain people and make sure they understand the context and why we do things a certain way. And so there's always that sort of constant challenge of, keeping the lights on of where you are today, but then continuing to build for where you're sort of going tomorrow. And then you just have to acknowledge that like you can't solve this by importing the process of a 10,000 person org and trying to use that when you're 1,000 people and being like, now we don't have to solve it anymore. It's like, because there's a such thing as too much process. So you can't have too much process because then you're going to strangle the company at any given phase. But you can't have too little process that it becomes total chaos either. So I think there's this sort of balancing ground of you're constantly rebuilding what the right amount of process and the right amount of system is. And I think it never ends. I'm sure Melissa and Nick have kind of seen that firsthand. Right? Like they've seen it, through even Dave, I think was pretty, he saw that 40 people, so a lot's changed.
A lot has changed. A lot has changed. I think that you nailed it. It's a series of phase progressions that we run through, and everything kind of has to get re-architected for each of those different phases. Again, these are very common frameworks we talk about, but they just are the truth of going. And I think we get the system design wrong often. You get the processes wrong. We get the tools wrong a lot of the time. We have a proliferation of tooling as a result of legacies from prior phases, and I think that's indicative. But it's actually very predictable, very consistent. Every company goes through it. We've had the great fortune of going through it, and we certainly made our share of mistakes along the way. But I think come out the other side. And I think the flip side is it's fascinating sort of the impact you can have as you get bigger, and really all the investments from our customers are what make the model work. And I think that's perhaps not as obvious is for us. This is this is just about making the market bigger for what we do, and we fund that from how we engage with customers. So we talk about our model in terms of like first and foremost, the practitioner, the user of our stuff is the center of what we do. That's goal number one. Number two is about then broadening the ecosystem, and then number three is about where ecosystem equals, hey, I want a Terraform provider for next thing along. And then the third part's around helping our customers run these products at scale. And that actually is what allows us to fund the other two things. And so it's really a virtuous circle. So what's happened as we've gotten bigger is our ability to invest in the community side. It's gotten much, much bigger. Investing in the ecosystem, it's got much, much, much bigger. And that's driven the kind of the scale of usage of the products. And so that's changed, but I think it's a very natural flywheel that's now working, and perhaps not obvious to everybody else that we wouldn't have 50 people in this organization doing community related things if it were not for that model working. And that is a pure function of scale. And I certainly hope the number is bigger and bigger and bigger, because that's how the model works.
And then there's the 14 million or so employees, or not actually employees, out in the community, which for me, I've never seen that before. I've never seen folks so passionate about tooling because it helps them do their job, and willing to kind of write blogs and do videos and get up on stage and talk about things, and really kind of also helping everybody else. That's incredible. Like that's like something I've not seen before. And like, to my literally the bottom of my heart, thank you to everybody who comes out and does that, because it's just nothing short of astounding what you're doing.
Awesome. I think it's kind of funny for me, because I worked at like big companies, and then I worked at small companies, and now I'm working at a company that's scaling up. And like, just like, I know from the start when they were just like a couple of people, and I was like 50 people, like already a lot of things has changed when it comes to tooling and processes. It's like, oh, the thing that we did like last month, that doesn't work anymore. We need to figure something out here. So I can appreciate that, and probably won't be in part of like going to 2,000 employees, probably not. But we'll see where that goes, and hopefully, if I need help, I know who to call at least. Yeah, Marco, you have the next one?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about scaling, and that kind of brought you a lot of success as a company and probably change a couple of things in your everyday lives as well. So I mean, obviously, probably, I mean, assuming people don't recognize you on the street, but like, I would definitely be interested to hear more about if things has changed in your day-to-day lives, or it's more or less the same. So maybe, I don't know, shall we start with Mitch or Arman?
Sure. Yeah, I'm based in Los Angeles where there's less tech, so I don't get recognized on the street. I would say like once or twice a year in a cafe, maybe. But if you're in San Francisco, yeah, like I don't wear any HashiCorp jackets or anything in San Francisco, because if you're on the subway, BART or something, like someone will probably ask you a question. They may not know who you are, but they recognize the company, right? So they'll ask you a question about HashiCorp. I know Armand got asked one time on the BART, like, what it's like to work there, I think that's a funny one. So yeah, that stuff not so much. I think the personal impact has really been it's been more about like the less direct. It's more about like that being a possibility. Just seeing the community, how big it is. Like that's, I think, the big change is seeing like this small open source project. I remember being excited when like Vagrant reached like 100 stars, right? I was like 3 digits of stars, right? Like it was really cool on GitHub. And now being able to see like so many companies using it and stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of personal satisfaction in being able to help create something that has that impact. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll answer maybe in a slightly different way, which is, I think every company goes through a few different phases in life, right? I think sort of like phase one of any startup is sort of like, how do you achieve relevance in a market? Or like how do you get people to care? And I look back to the early days of HashiCorp, and people were like, oh, they're the Vagrant company, right? Like that's how people talked about us. In fact, one of our investors continued to put us as the Vagrant company, even when they would throw internal events, even though we kept explaining that we're actually HashiCorp and not the Vagrant company. But I think it's sort of getting out of that rut of getting people to actually say, hey, we're an ops tool company or a DevOps company. Like we build things that aren't Vagrant. We run in production. We're not just dev tooling. And getting people to sort of buy into, I'll call it our philosophy, right? Because I think we always had this philosophy of infrastructure as code and immutability and sort of, a microservice orientation. And at the time when we started the company, none of those things were in vogue, right? Like, in fact, most of those things ran against the grain, right? Like most people were building monolithic LAMP-based applications using heavy config management to treat everything like, pets and not cattle. And so everything that we said went kind of counter grain to what people were doing. And so I think in that first phase, the hard part was like getting people to care. And I think that's where a lot of our maybe personal energy was focused on, was more outbound, educating people, evangelizing. I think me and Mitchell probably did 1,000 talks on like, what is infrastructure as code? And then, I think what then flipped is when you get to phase 2 of a company, it's a bit more commercial focused. It's about, okay, you have open source users, you have people who know who you are, but do you have a product, right? Can you sell anything? So you focus on that product market fit. And then I think the third phase of any kind of company is scale. And I think we're very much in that third phase now, where now it's sort of flipped, right? It went from, we're sort of pulling people's teeth to be like, no, you should think about things like infrastructure as code. And they're like, we don't want to talk to you. To sort of the opposite problem, where now it's like everyone has accepted infrastructure as code, and everyone's accepted microservices, and everyone's accepted immutability. And now like, we want to talk to you guys. And so now we have sort of the opposite problem, which is like we went from nobody wants to talk to us to everybody wants to talk to us. And so now as a result, we sort of live on a plane, as I put it, right? So, I think from a personal life impact, I probably travel 50, 75% of my time. I joke I changed airline loyalty from United to Delta this year and managed to hit status on both of them. So it kind of gives you a sense of how much we're traveling. But I think that's just driven by this flip in the market of people believe in this stuff. They believe in the technology. They believe in the philosophy. And now they want to talk to us to better understand it, learn how to get up to speed with it, get enabled on it. So it's a great problem. It just means, it would be convenient if someone could invent cloning or teleportation.
There's
I think
funny.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Sorry.
I was gonna say there's just a funny anecdotal story there. It's related to principles too in this, but on how the viewpoint has shifted. I gave this talk at PuppetConf like probably 10 years ago now, You can still find it on YouTube. It was basically where I introduced Packer, more or less. I mean, Packer was already announced, but it was probably the first public talk I gave about Packer. And I spoke at PuppetConf about how like golden images are like the future. Containers didn't exist yet, right? But I was like, this idea, we're gonna not spin up the server and then install stuff live. We're gonna pre-bake everything and then we're gonna ship a binary around. And that ended up being true for containers too. And I gave this sort of like philosophical talk, and that's why I created Packer. And that was not well received. That was not a lot of people came up to me after that talk and was like, very interesting, but like, I think you're moving backwards. You know, because I was at a configuration management conference. Like the whole idea was that you did things live and reconciled and fixed things. Like it wasn't that you pre-baked it. So that was pretty funny to go from that to I think containers, though, being the big thing that now everybody ships binary images around, and config management is much more niche. So it's just funny how that's shifted.
Yeah, indeed. But definitely proves that you were right back then. So I think that was a good decision to make, probably, to kind of move towards that space. To kind of circle back a bit, I'm actually curious to hear, like, maybe Melissa, you're definitely well known in the community now as well, because the community has overgrown as well. So maybe you can walk us through what changed for you, maybe.
Sure. So personally, I think the biggest change was just coming to HashiCorp and the change in lifestyle from traveling all the time to traveling a lot less and having more prioritized travel. The kids steal my gear and they love HashiCorp and they're crazy, but I think professionally, it's a lot more interesting to talk about when you go from a team of 3 people who are just out there to get what they can and help the community in any way they can, and you have all these big ideas. And I think I pitched Armand and the team a 90-day plan that I'm still executing on 5 years later. So that's kind of crazy. Maybe it was a little ambitious at the time, but now the team's bigger, but also there are other teams in the company that can pick up some of those dreams and run with them. And that's really exciting to see as well. So it's been, yeah, the dog's very dramatic, sorry. But it's been an amazing journey.
I will say Melissa did have the most aggressive 90-day plan I've ever seen. I'm like, I don't think this is even a 5-year plan, to be honest.
Cool. Sounds ambitious indeed. But well executed. How about you, Nick? Like, how was it from your perspective? I'm sure people recognize you when you go to a conference, or right?
I mean, sort of, yeah, you know, you meet people, and I think it's like, for me, all I've ever wanted to do was to help people. So like before I went to work at HashiCorp, I was very interested in kind of helping and trying my best to enable and help the internal team. And I realized it was something I was passionate about, and I wanted to do that sort of, you know, on sort of to try and reach a wider audience. Like, one of the biggest mistakes in my entire life was spending the time writing a book. It's probably the most unrewarding thing you can ever do, from a perspective of the amount of pain that it causes you. The second biggest mistake was doing it again. But the kind of the whole concept was about trying to get information out and to help people to be effective and share what I know. So like, you know, you meet people, and I wouldn't say I'm recognizable. I don't want to be anything like that, but I, you know, if I'm wearing a shirt and somebody has, hey, a question, I've got all the time to answer that, which is something I really enjoy. Like the conversations you have with folk, like just recently reInvent and KubeCon, is really what kind of makes my day. So yeah, like I'd be happy to chat or drink coffee or tea or anything.
Awesome. How about you, Dave? How would you say that your personal life changed throughout the, you know, the exceptional growth and amazing success of HashiCorp?
It's more like much more like Armand's, in that you know, we spend a lot of our time in customer facing or, you know, market facing roles, because there's just so much more interest in what we do than there was 7 years ago, and that's been shocking. But I would also maybe bring it up a level and say, like, as you get bigger, and this is natural, particularly with the company that builds open source tools that are massively used, you end up with actually three sets of constituents that actually start to become the focus of what you do. The first of those is, we have a deep responsibility for this community that, many people, have careers built around our products and technologies, and it's a really critical thing to them. And that's important to us. That's a responsibility that we're very, very aware of. Number two is we end up with an employee base who, again, is actually 100% rely on us to continue to execute for what they do. And that's something that certainly impacts our personal life and the amount of time we spent doing customer facing things, because we have to deliver on that responsibility. And then the third thing is, and this is the most fun, honestly, is you get to see how our products are getting used in some of the most important things in the world, and that is another enormous responsibility. It's fascinating. It's also an awesome responsibility. I think that can't help be something that impacts your personal life, and that these are responsibilities that we've taken on as we've grown. They may not seem obvious from the outside, but those are all massive responsibilities that keep us sort of pressing the pedal down, and with a huge respect for all three of those constituents, which have gotten much larger in the last 7 years than they did when we started. So that certainly is important to us. It's something we think about every day, but it's a privilege to be able to do. My kids get infuriated when I look at every single application, every single thing that I do, and I go, I can tell you how that's built. And that wasn't the case 7 years ago, but now when I swipe my credit card, or I make a trade, or whether I jump on a Zoom, I get to say, we know how that works. So in my personal life, that's a very real thing that touches it every single day, that I think is, what keeps it so interesting, despite the broader heft of things that we're now responsible for. Super cool.
Awesome. Really good insight. And yeah, probably half of the things that you mentioned, they runs on, or at least provisioned by Terraform, right?
Well, actually, and Vault and Console, it blows our mind. And Armand, sometimes you see these support escalations that we get, because there's all sorts of reasons, like you run it out of memory or whatever it is, and you get to see like the Prometheus dashboards that people have built, and it just blows your mind. You're like, because I don't know if you guys can speak to it. I'm not sure you ever imagined the scale of systems would be authenticating every transaction through Console and Vault and Nomad. It is absolutely awe-inspiring.
Well, it's always fun because it's like some of these still end up being a surprise to us. Like we had at our conference, so like a month ago, we had CrowdStrike was there, and they got up on stage and talked about how they have a 95,000 node Console deployment that we knew nothing about before the conference. And you're just like, that's just insane. There's these deployments of this size that you just find out about, and that's open source for you.
Actually, that kind of comes into the next question, because obviously, you have a company, so you need to make profit for something, but at the same time, all the tooling itself, in much aspects of it at least, is very much open source and free to use in more or less any way you need to. And you speak about like all the different scenarios that you see that these tools are being used. But how about when you see stuff like humanitarian projects and things to that nature, stuff that actually is, making a change in the world? How do you feel when you see like the tooling that you over the last 10 years now have been like chipping off and trying to make as perfect as possible? What do you feel when you see your tools being used for those kind of projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always kind of cool, and I think we see it in the fun thing about infrastructure is it's so horizontal, right? It's everywhere, right? And so, you're involved with, to your point, everything from running large businesses to helping new startups get launched to sort of humanitarian projects. And we did a few things where like the UN and some other, big groups were using some of our tooling. And so it's kind of cool. It's cool. I mean, it's in some ways it's weird, right? Because I think to Dave's point, it's like, not only do you see insight into operationally how some of the world's biggest organizations work, but it's also like you get weird insight into like these random things about like, okay, I mean, like how are people using our infrastructure to enforce the US-Iran deal on nuclear proliferation? And you're like, that's a nonprofit who's doing that kind of work, and there's infrastructure that's powering that. And it turns out they use the HashiCorp stack to power some of that stuff. And you're like, you find out about these really random things that you would never expect that you'd have any connection to some of this stuff. And the world's just kind of a weirdly small place, and infrastructure is this horizontal, but it's everywhere. So whether it's like, people raising money for, a hurricane, or, enforcing, these sort of humanitarian treaties or whatever, it's like you're involved with all sorts of stuff that you would frankly never expect.
We had a customer come, or a user come on and talk about the vaccine development for these vaccines. And, we all know enough about how this sort of stuff works. You can imagine how that stuff all works, right? This is on massive district compute farms doing algorithms around, discovery, and you can imagine how that works. And I think that's a good example of Armin's point. This stuff is horizontal, so it touches everything. And back to my point of, like, if you look at an application running, you can infer how it's built, and you can infer almost certainly that our products are powering, and we don't even know. It's kind of cool to watch.
I don't know if anyone else is there. Mitchell, for instance.
I think everyone else said it pretty well, so I don't think I have too much to add here.
Yeah. Oh, it's yeah, like you said, like it's such like a thing that touches everything. Like the tools that you created are kind of very applicable in a lot of different situations, and it just happens to be kind of like in the right field to see some of this stuff. So it's really cool to hear that you see this in live environments and get a kick out of it.
Yeah, I think
yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, I think the one thing I did think about is, obviously there's like the big use cases, and then there's humanitarian use cases and stuff. Those are always interesting. I think the ones that just like always hit me the most are when I surprise discover that there's something in my home that is using the software. That's always a little bit shocking. I remember just like one example is we visited like a cable provider here in the United States, and they talked about how their boxes were running our software, and I was like, wait, you're my cable provider, so and I have one of those boxes in my house, stuff like that. I have, of course I have like a rack of some home automation stuff, and I've poked into some of these like proprietary vendor systems and like listed the processes, and I've seen Vault running and things like that. It's like, that's interesting that that's in there. I think that always kind of shocks me.
Excellent. Marco, did you have the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome to hear the impact that you're having. That's amazing. And I would like to kind of turn it away a bit, the discussion. So since we're kind of approaching the kind of the Christmas holidays, I actually have a more kind of a generic question for all of you. Like, if you would have like a crystal ball, what's your vision for the next maybe 5 years with the community? And I would like to start with Melissa on this one, maybe.
Awesome. So the vision for the next 5 years is to grow and expand the community, but also to try as much as possible to make the digital experience of engaging with the community as awesome as the live experience has been over the years. The events team did a very amazing job early on of kind of setting the stage for the live experience, making it a very connected, very interpersonal kind of engagement. And while the community is growing, building the community in a way where we retain our kindness to each other and share with each other as much as possible that knowledge, and enable people to do so. So build the platforms that they need to do that properly. And thankfully, I'm not alone in that. So so there's a big team of people working on these things right now. But I'd say my vision for the community is to grow it in a way that we retain our kindness and are able to help each other and keep improving on that digital experience, because that's most of the way that the community engages with us day to day, right? The in-person experiences are wonderful, but they're a couple times a year.
Yeah, I definitely have to say, when we kind of entered the pandemic era, I think your digital platform was really pioneering on that kind of space. I have to say it was my best experience with the digital conferences at that point, and it still is up to this day. Right, maybe let's go next with Nick, maybe. your thoughts on community vision for the next 5 years.
So for me, I'm almost going to go the opposite of what Melissa said, in that I want to. So one of the things I really missed with the pandemic was actually getting out and socializing in person at our hugs, and I want to do more of that. So I'm going to make a concerted effort to kind of be anywhere you will have me, because I've really missed being out and getting out at hugs and things like that. So I want to do more of that. That's probably really selfish of me, but that's what I want to see, because I genuinely like the communication, the conversations that happen, like just kind of like the ideation and things that when people get together and are just kind of having good technical discussions. I really miss that with pandemic. So hopefully next year and beyond there'll be a lot more.
Absolutely. I think it's at least for me, it's a special feeling coming back from a conference. I usually come back like full of new ideas and kind of things I want to do. So definitely appreciate that kind of aspect of it. Maybe Arman, what would you say your vision would be for next 5 years?
Yeah, I'd probably put myself closer to maybe Nick's. I feel like COVID's been tough because it's like I've always loved being able to get in person and spend time with people. You know, the hallway tracks in some sense have always been like the fun part to me of some of the conferences. So I've missed like not being able to go to any hugs in person and not being able to like even the conferences, as much as I think we did invest and make the digital platforms great, I miss the energy and the in-person interaction. It was fun the back half of this year when we got to do, you know, HashiConf US again, you know, back in person. That was just like a great experience. So I definitely miss a lot of that side of it. And I'd love to see some of the hugs kind of come back to life, because I think there's just something different about that kind of in-person interaction. And I think certainly it can be supported by the digital side to make sure that we can be inclusive of everybody, and not everybody can travel and attend all these things. So, you know, can we make it a world-class digital experience? But I do think something gets lost when it's entirely digital. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to a lot of that stuff coming back. I think the other aspects for the community is I think people want to have more ways of sort of demonstrating their knowledge, demonstrating their sort of expertise in this stuff. So I think as we think about sort of like, you know, we already have certifications and relatively, you know, I'll call it level 1, but it's like, how do we go much richer on certifications? How does that get baked into community profiles? I think we've talked about the notion of like, what if your HashiCorp ID, right? Like could actually encode like, hey, you're actually a Terraform expert, or you're a Vault level, 1 or 2 or 3 certified or whatever, and make it a little bit easier for people to sort of share those credentials and have that sort of be attached to their HashiCorp identity, whether that's in our community forums or at our events and conferences and things like that. And so I think there's some of that kind of stuff where it's like, I think we could go a lot deeper with sort of like helping that identity and mapping it to people's expertise and mapping it to certifications and sort of making that a richer experience throughout the HashiCorp ecosystem at least. So I think there's some more kind of work there around our digital platforms. I know we've invested a lot in the developer.hashicorp, and we're trying to kind of like bring all of our community-facing content into one portal versus we had Learn and our IO sites and our Discuss site and 10 other things. So trying to kind of bring it together and make that sort of the point of making that a really rich experience, and then integrating it deeply to have a unified identity across Terraform Cloud and HCP and the developer portal. And so it's like your HashiCorp identity should actually kind of bring a lot of that with you rather than it kind of gets lost. So I think there's a lot of that where can we invest in making that better certifications, improving the digital platforms, but also bringing in-person back, because I think there's a certain richness to that. And I think taking it more global, right? I think historically we were very US focused, and then we added HashiConf EU. And I think over time, it's like, does it make sense as we have a bigger and bigger community in Asia to also have more community-focused events in Asia over time as well? And so I think that'll all expand to become much more of a global community over the next 5 years.
Cool. I think that's a really good segue. You definitely missed Mitchell at the HashiConf EU this year. What would be your vision for the community for next 5 years as part of being an IC now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess it is related to being an IC, but I think I'd give the same answer regardless, which is, and Armand covered it a bit, but I think looking at the broader community, not just the folks that can make it to events or hugs or anything, I think the digital platform is the most exciting. I think that If you look at our websites and you look at the docs and things like that, for a long time, up until probably a few years ago, for a long time they were the same, right? It was like the same style as the doc site that you would create in 2012. That started changing a few years ago, but I think the really big change that we announced this year was the developer.hashicorp.com experience. And I think that, you know, that takes all the improvements that have been made over the past few years, that include improving tutorials, improving video content, improving community like forum access and things like that, and like has the opportunity to bring it all together, and that like affects everyone. And it's even just like little things that sound easy but end up being really hard, like version docs. You know, now that that's rolled out across all things, like that has a really broad impact on the community in a really, you know, in a really big way. So I think that having a centralized platform to deliver stuff like that is really huge. Actually, just the other day, I went to download Terraform, and usually I just like install it with a command line script. So I hadn't actually seen the download page on the website, and like I realized at that moment I hadn't seen the download page on the website in many years. And at some point it became really awesome. Like I didn't realize that the download page, now you select versions, like there's way better information. I was like, this is really, really good. But like, that's again, like a thing that's like, someone put a lot of work into it. Doesn't seem that big. It has a huge impact because it's literally every new user downloading the product. And so I think the digital experience for the community and seeing where that goes over the next 5 years is where I'm most excited.
Awesome. I think we have a really good balance between digital and in-person events. So Dave, you're going to be a tiebreaker now.
Yeah, I think you know, we obviously want to do both. We want to do both. I think the group's covered it well. I would just bring up one other thing. We have an opportunity to introduce sort of next use case along, next problem along to people in our community, and I hear this a lot when you talk to people. Like even at HashiCorp in LA, people would say like, yeah, I came here because we're huge Terraform users, but actually to have that vault thing's kind of interesting to me. So I'm coming to learn a bit more about that problem, because so many of these problems are like, they're like the Unix oriented next thing along. I'd say that's also one of the things we're trying to get better at is just exposing people to next problem along in the world of cloud, because uniquely we have decided to tackle many of them. So in addition to the in-person digital mix, I think you'll probably see from us a little bit more just trying to introduce people to the next use case along.
Cool. Awesome. Over to you, Robert.
Excellent. And like at a personal note, you know, as someone diagnosed with ADHD, as soon as COVID hit and everything went virtual, I've seen nothing. Like the flood of just virtual content everywhere that everyone was doing, really hard for me. So like a hybrid approach would be great, but I would prefer to come to the live thing so I can just set off my brain time for that. Anywho, I think we're getting into the last question that we have. Yeah, 5 minutes left. It's a bit of a tricky one, I guess. But what is your favorite HashiCorp product? So it's like selecting your favorite child, I guess. In many cases, I don't know. Mitchell, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I've been asked this many times over the years, and I've always given the same answer, so it's pretty consistent. But it's close. There's a lot up there, but I think for me, my favorite's always been Terraform, just because it was really fun to build. It was really it was an interesting experience to build. It wasn't like very hard engineering to build, but I think the practical difficulties of making that many API calls and what happens when you try to do that were really interesting. And it's just really fun to Terraform apply and see so many things happen at one time in so many systems that you don't necessarily control. Like you could be spinning up, AWS VMs while also creating DNS records in a separate provider. And it like seeing all this just happen together, and then being able to destroy and just like go get lunch and know that nothing is left over is like a really awesome feeling. So yeah, that's my favorite.
That makes perfect sense. It's also one of the first tools, I guess, a lot of people now come into like the Azure stack with, dealing with infrastructure stuff.
Yeah, Armand joked that people used to call us the Vagrant Company, and now depending who you ask, some people think like, oh, they're the Terraform company or they're the Vault company. They're like, it's now diverse, but it's funny that like that's happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about you, Amron?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick a different product for sure. For me, Nomad's always had a special place in my heart, and I think for me, it sits at such this intersection of my interests, right? Like, I'm a bit of a distributed systems junkie, and that is like, if you have a distributed system problem, Nomad has it, right? Like, from distributed scheduling to consensus to health checking to some of the workload security problems to multi-data center failover, like you name it, Nomad has the problem. And so I think that's just, there's something fun about that. Like it's an enormous technical challenge to build that product and then to build it in a way that's such high performance. We do some of these benchmarks where it's like we did the 1 million container challenge, which we thought was obscene. And then we did the 2 million container challenge. And you watch these graphs and it's something like Nomad's deploying like 25,000 Redis containers per second, right? To get to those kind of 2 million container, workloads. And you're like, there's just something insane about that to me. Like, it's just kind of awe-inspiring as you're watching these graphs and you're like, every time you blink, another 50,000 Redis instances just got deployed. And you're like, that's just kind of cool. And, we work with some customers that operate Nomad at just enormous scale. And like, you see their Nomad dashboards when they log in and it's like, their cluster has like 12 petabytes of memory or something like that, and to me, I remember when I first got into computers, it was fun when, you'd orchestrate something on like 3 or 4 machines and you had your little shell script and, you thought that was cool when you deployed to 4 computers. And, now you're working with customers that push a button and they're deploying to 40,000 machines at a time. And I think just the complexity of the problem Nomad solves and then seeing how elegantly that gets packaged. And when you see this, it's a 10-line Nomad job and you run Nomad run and all of a sudden you're deployed onto 40,000 machines and you're like, there's just something incredibly elegant to me knowing just how complex the machinery is that makes that thing work.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. It's really cool that like the technical aspects of it all, the economy. It's one of the things, like creating a tool that does a lot of complex stuff, but really easy to use. That is really cool. How about you, Dave?
It's almost like Nomad is encapsulates everything because it's using Vault under the covers to authenticate the identity. It's using Console for the routing, and it's using its own way to schedule things. So it almost is like the ultimate in distributed systems complexity. For me, I actually like Console. I think I like the distributed systems aspects of it, and I love the fact that you can, the elegance of it. This is how every machine is finding every other machine in an entire state every minute of every day is kind of a remarkable thing to think about. And so when you see that, as Armand pointed out, over 1,000 machines, over 17,000 machines, over 20,000 machines, the level of complexity is just unthinkable. But it's sort of the ultimate distributed systems. So it's always going to be Console for me.
Awesome. Melissa, how about you?
I'm still going to go with Terraform. So Terraform kind of took over a lot of things I didn't love about being in ops and implementing things. Had a bunch of customers here in Seattle. Some were building clouds. Others just wanted their infrastructure to be more consistent and spent a lot of time building the same thing over and over and over. Very boring, not very challenging from like learn new things. Most of what you learn is that you're not good at doing the same thing over and over and over again as a human. So having a tool like Terraform come in and say, oh, I don't have to be a living script anymore is really powerful. I'll also give a shout out to Vault though, because it gives my sister and I something to talk about professionally. She's a security person and loves Vault. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, like a personal note when it comes to Terraform, like I did a really big, I work with Azure, that's what I do. And I built a really big thing with a lot of virtual networks and a lot of stuff. And then apparently the other people we were working with didn't give us the right side arranged. So I had to pull down everything and then put it back up again. And for me, that was literally just going in and changing the side arrange and go, all right, just tear down whatever, because it was a greenfield deployment. It's like thousands of stuff. And just thinking if I had to do that without having Terraform, I'd probably still be sitting there like redeploying stuff, I guess. But how about you, Nick?
I'm gonna totally sit on the fence and say I don't have a favorite, because ultimately, if one of the pieces of the kind of the suite didn't exist, I would have to go find another tool. And that was one of the things just was always attracted me, you know, that like console in the early days, which I was like amazed at when I started to build microservices. I'm like, oh wow, the Vagrant company makes this other tool. And this is exactly what I need to be able to manage these kind of highly ephemeral distributed applications that I'm now working with. And then when it came to kind of like secrets, I'm like, well, I should probably think about the security log. And there was a tool there for that as well. And then you know, for deploying applications and kind of running them and then getting access to them, you know, it was just kind of like, it's just a continual thing. And all of the tools just work for me. And so like, I'm really hard pushed to choose what a favorite would be, like, because I wouldn't want to live without any of them, if that makes sense. And if that's a really kind of get out of clause, I'm probably the only person that's not going to be hated on internal Slack for choosing and picking a side.
But it's, you know, it's good to have favorites, but at the same time, yeah, I think that's kind of like the thing about HashiCorp, like from an outside perspective, at least. It's one of those things where you're a selective field, but with a lot of like there's a lot of things inside the field, and you're really executing on a lot of things on a lot of different products that are doing a lot of great things, that be it by standalone or, you know, in combination with each other. So it's really great, and thanks for to all of you for, you know, making an effort, creating a better day-to-day work life for many of us, at least.
Yeah, indeed. And before we wrap it up, like now, Robert, you have to say which tool is your favorite.
Well, it's easy for me to say Terraform. That is where a lot of my day-to-day work go. I even create services with GitOps and Terraform and do a lot of weird stuff that most people don't do. I don't recommend it. Come to me if you want help. But Vault has been one of those things that just makes sense to me as like a kind of like a vendor neutral place to put your secrets and the things you can do with it. And obviously Terraform kind of like bind it all together. So doing stuff with Vault is also awesome thing. But I think I would have to say Terraform. How about you, Marco?
Awesome. I'm probably slightly biased, but I mean, my first tool was Vagrant, obviously, but then I quickly adopted Terraform afterwards. So I would probably have to stick with Terraform, but it's really hard to pick one. I agree with all of you on this call that the whole Hashi stack has been amazing, and it's really covering all the bases that you need to run a successful kind of infrastructure in the cloud or on-prem if you want so. So really awesome job. So with that, I think we kind of hit the top of the hour. So I would like to thank everyone for your time, for your great insights, for your contributions to the community, and yeah, keep up doing the good job that you've been doing. Thank you.
Thanks so much for moderating us, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
All right, that was great. Again, thanks everyone. Hopefully this was useful. I thought it was great. What do you think, Jasmine?
I think it was amazing. I think you all as moderators were amazing. I always love hearing Armand, Mitchell, Dave talk about HashiCorp, about the beginnings and how they got started. So it's always like really just awe-inspiring to hear them. And then the community, you know, from a community angle, listening to Melissa and Nick, it was amazing. You know, I saw people writing in the chat, they recognized Nick, they're waiting for his second book. You know, I'm waiting for his second book. I just to get it autographed. I don't know, it might be too technical for me to understand, but this has just been really good. And you all as moderators, like, I tip my hat to you. You did a phenomenal job. Thank you so much for joining us. So before we leave, I wouldn't be the community manager if I didn't talk about some of our community programs. So there are about 3 or 4 things that I just want to announce. The first is that this is not where the celebration ends for our 10 years of community. We also are doing 10 years of HashiCorp Trivia, celebrating the 10 years of community, where you have the chance of winning limited edition swag. So head over to Twitter. The handle is @HashiCorp Users, and answer some trivia questions. I'm actually going to, since I have you all with me, I'm going to announce today's winner. The winner is Adit Modi. And I know that you guys recognize that name because Adit is also an ambassador. He's based in India, where we have Hashi Talks India coming up. And I'm hoping that since Adit won, he's going to be so excited and he's going to say yes to emceeing Hashi Talks India. So that's another program that I just want to let you all know about is Hashi Talks. If you all enjoyed this, you enjoyed listening to how we use HashiCorp tools and the different products. I know Dave mentioned, that part of his vision for community moving forward is to just talk about the ongoing use cases. And this is exactly where you can do that at Hashi Talks. So go to hashi.co/HashiTalks-hub, where you can see all of the upcoming Hashi Talks. I mentioned India. We have one coming up for France, which will be produced in French, and the call for speakers for that closes on the 15th. So if you have an interesting use case and you speak French, please submit for our call for speakers. And then, of course, we have our 24-hour one that is going to happen in February. And then the last thing is the community keeps us going. And you all mentioned, Roberta, you especially, how important it is to be in person. Yes, these digital, things are great and we love the engagement, but it's also great to just be in person. So you saw that we had 2 HashiCorp user groups meeting today for the 10 years of celebration. I know the Amsterdam one is still there. They're still out there. They're still meeting. But if you want to join a HashiCorp user group, go to meetup.com/pro/hugs to find a HashiCorp user group near you. And if there's not one, we can start one. That's no problem. We want to make sure that we have opportunities where we're able to engage and learn from each other. So with that, I think that this has come to a close. Again, I want to thank you both for being our fantastic MCs. And I could not let this go out without thanking our amazing community who has supported us for 10 years and counting. So thank you to all of HashiCorp community. Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.